The firing range at the FBI SWAT training center in Quantico, Virginia, fell silent as an unassuming woman in her 40s approached the shooting line. The military-styled recruits stood in perfect formation, exchanging glances as she walked past them with hesitant steps. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our civilian observer, Ms. Harper," announced the instructor with thinly veiled condescension. His voice carried across the outdoor range, making her presence seem like an unwelcome interruption. Snickers rippled through the elite trainees as they sized her up, noting her department store blazer, sensible shoes, and the administrative badge clipped to her belt. A muscular recruit with a crew cut loudly whispered to his buddies, "Is this some diversity quota joke?" His friends chuckled, not bothering to lower their voices as Harper picked up the tactical rifle, her hands trembling slightly. Another trainee mimicked her stance mockingly, drawing more laughter. The instructor sighed impatiently while checking his watch, making it clear this demonstration was merely a formality to be endured. They had no idea they were about to be humbled by the woman who once held the highest confirmed kill record in Marine Corps history. Diane Harper lived in a modest apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, just miles from the nation's capital, yet worlds away from its power corridors. At 43, she moved through life almost invisibly. A middle-aged woman with prematurely graying hair, often pulled back in a practical ponytail, no makeup, and clothes that neither drew attention nor suggested particular care. Her two-bedroom unit contained minimal furnishings, functional IKEA pieces, a small television she rarely watched, and bookshelves filled with historical biographies and technical manuals rather than novels or decorative items. She worked administrative support at the Department of Veterans Affairs, processing paperwork with quiet efficiency that earned her nominal yearly evaluations of meets expectations. The supervisor, a harried man in his 50s, had twice forgotten to include her in the department's annual photo. Colleagues barely registered her presence in meetings or remembered to include her in lunch invitations. She arrived early, left precisely at 5, and spoke only when necessary. Her desk held no personal photos, only a small worn wooden box with a tarnished Marine Corps emblem that she occasionally touched absently, like a talisman from another life. What no one realized was the calculated precision with which Diane had constructed this invisibility. The measured cadence of her typing masked fingers that once adjusted for wind variables at 800 meters. The downcast eyes that avoided office politics had once tracked moving targets through dust storms in Fallujah. The methodical filing system that organized veterans' claims was maintained by the same mind that had once memorized elaborate terrain maps and patrol schedules. In the evening, when her co-workers gathered for happy hours she never attended, none of them would have guessed that she ran 6 miles every night, maintaining a physical discipline that would challenge men half her age. Beneath her department store blazer, on her right shoulder blade, a faded tattoo depicted crosshairs surrounding the Latin phrase, "one shot, one breath," words she had lived by in another existence. And each night, alone in her apartment, she still completed the same rigorous hand-strengthening exercises that had once kept her trigger finger steady during 50-hour surveillance operations. The wooden box on her desk contained the Navy Cross nobody in her current life knew about, awarded for an operation whose details remained classified. Also inside was a photograph showing a younger, hardened version of herself in desert camo standing beside 3 men whose faces she had carefully blurred out with permanent marker after leaving active duty. 10 years ago, she had preserved their names on the back of the photo, Marcus, Decker, and Reynolds, but had severed all contact with her former team when she disappeared into civilian anonymity. The final item in the box was a spent shell casing from what military records would only describe as the Kandahar operation, a mission that had changed the course of regional conflict but cost Harper everything she had built. She had walked away from that life completely, burying the sharpshooter known as Ghost under layers of deliberate mediocrity and anonymity. Until today, when an unexpected email had arrived, triggering the dormant warrior who had been hiding in plain sight for a decade. 10 years earlier, Marine Staff Sergeant Diane Harper had been the most lethal long-distance shooter in her battalion, with confirmed eliminations that had saved countless American lives during the bloodiest phase of Middle East operations. At 33, she had already spent 15 years in the Corps, rising through ranks with a reputation for methodical perfection rather than charismatic leadership. Her particular talent wasn't just accuracy, though her marksmanship scores remained unmatched in battalion records, but rather her psychological resilience. Where other snipers eventually developed tremors, nightmares, or combat stress, Harper maintained an almost preternatural calm. She could remain motionless for impossible durations, control the breathing to the microsecond between heartbeats, and most crucially, disconnect emotionally from the devastating effects of her precision. Her commanding officers called her their mechanical angel, delivering protection with cold mathematical certainty while protecting her brothers in arms from ambushes and insurgent attacks. Harper's legendary status among special operations units was cemented after she eliminated a high-value target at 1,400 meters during a sandstorm, a shot that weapons specialists later claimed should have been ballistically impossible given the conditions. When questioned about the shot in a classified debriefing, Harper had simply stated, "I felt the wind shift and adjusted accordingly." This almost supernatural connection to her environment had made her the Corps' first choice for the most sensitive missions. Unlike her more socially integrated colleagues, Harper never spoke about her assignments, never tallied her confirmed operations, and never accepted the various unofficial badges and tokens that snipers sometimes collected. "I'm not a hunter collecting trophies," she once told a new spotter assigned to her team. "I'm just a mechanism ensuring that our people come home." This detachment had made her both respected and slightly feared, even among hardened combat veterans. Everything changed during Operation Silent Vanguard in 2015. Her 4-person team had been deployed to eliminate a high-value target responsible for orchestrating attacks against coalition forces. Intelligence had pinpointed the target's location in a remote compound, and Harper's team had been inserted covertly to set up observation and execute the mission. After 3 days in position, 72 hours of rotating sleep schedules, minimal water, and constant vigilance, the moment came. Harper had clear authorization, perfect sightlines, and textbook conditions for the shot. What intelligence hadn't revealed was that the compound was also housing a diplomatic meeting that wasn't supposed to be happening. When Harper's bullet found its intended target with characteristic precision, it triggered an international incident that the government needed to disavow immediately. Within hours, the narrative had been rewritten. There had been no authorized operation, just a rogue element acting without proper clearance. The fallout was swift and merciless. Despite following orders exactly as they had been issued through proper channels, Harper and her team became convenient scapegoats. Her commanding officer, Colonel James Westfield, the same man who had once called her the future of special operations, testified that Harper had acted against protocol, making a reckless decision that jeopardized American interests abroad. The man who had pinned the Navy Cross on her chest 2 years earlier now looked through her, as if she were a stranger during the closed military inquiry. Staff Sergeant Harper has always demonstrated a troubling independence from chain of command, Westfield stated for the record, contradicting 15 years of exemplary performance reviews. The betrayal cut deeper than any combat wound she had sustained. In the officer's mess, later that evening, when he thought no one was listening, Westfield had muttered to another colonel, "Sometimes you need to sacrifice a pawn to protect the king." Harper's spotter had overheard and relayed the comment to her. The final confirmation that her distinguished career had meant nothing when political expediency required a sacrifice. The classified nature of the operation meant Harper couldn't defend herself publicly. Her team was disbanded, her security clearance suspended pending a review that would never be completed. 3 months later, she was honorably discharged, technically unblemished on paper, but effectively blacklisted from any meaningful security or defense position. The teammates scattered to private military contractors and overseas operations, maintaining their skills and identity in the shadowy world of deniable operations. But Harper made the more radical decision to disappear completely. Some ghosts need to stay buried, she had told Marcus, her former spotter, the last time they spoke at a nondescript diner in Virginia. I'm done being anyone's weapon or scapegoat. She surrendered her custom rifle, the extension of herself through which she had once exercised such terrible power, and watched as it was lobbed into military inventory, never to be fired by her hands again. That night, she cut her hair, burned her combat journals, and systematically erased all digital traces of her operational history. She kept only the wooden box with her Navy Cross and the doctored photograph, not as mementos of pride, but as reminders of institutional betrayal. The day she began her administrative job at Veterans Affairs, she locked away not just her past identity, but the exceptional abilities that had defined her. For 10 years, she had lived in self-imposed mediocrity, finding a strange peace in being overlooked and underestimated. Until yesterday, when an official FBI email had arrived requesting her participation in a SWAT training observation program, a routine outreach to VA administrative staff. The message had seemed innocuous, but Harper recognized the signature. Special Agent Thomas Reeves, once a junior officer who had witnessed her shooting records before the disastrous operation. After a decade of hiding, someone had found Ghost. The question that had kept her awake all night was whether this was a chance at redemption or another institutional trap. The FBI training center hummed with testosterone and institutional arrogance as Harper was escorted through security checkpoints. The facility sprawled across acres of Virginia woodland, a self-contained city dedicated to creating the Bureau's elite operators. Shooting ranges, tactical villages, and classroom buildings were arranged in clinical precision, much like the military bases where Harper had once felt at home. Now, wearing civilian clothes and clutching a visitor badge, she felt like an alien species transplanted to a vaguely familiar ecosystem. The SWAT program was conducting its quarterly qualification assessments, with this year's class widely considered the most promising in a decade. These weren't regular agents but specialized tactical operators, former special forces, championship marksmen, and elite police officers selected from across the country. Their physical training scores broke previous records, and their psychological profiles showed the perfect balance of aggression and discipline. They'd moved through the facility with the swagger of men who had never known failure and never expected to. "Our civilian observer has arrived," announced Deputy Director Lawrence Keller to the assembled trainees with poorly concealed disdain. At 55, Keller represented old guard FBI leadership, polished, political, and perpetually frustrated by diversity initiatives he considered dilutions of standards. His silver hair was cut in the same style he'd worn for 30 years, and his tailored suit conveyed authority without requiring the tactical gear his subordinates favored. Miss Harper from Veterans Affairs will be watching today's qualifications as part of our. He glanced at his notes with theatrical annoyance. Community Engagement Program. The explanatory tone suggested he was humoring some administrative requirement forced upon him by headquarters. The 24 trainees, arranged in precise formation, assessed Harper with the instant dismissal reserved for those deemed irrelevant to their world. Their eyes catalogued her civilian attire, her administrative posture, and her apparent nervousness, then collectively decided she wasn't worth further attention. Training Officer Marcus Jennings, a barrel-chested former Army Ranger, sized Harper up with a dismissive glance. His face, weathered from years of fieldwork, betrayed no recognition of the name that had once been whispered reverentially in special operations circles. "We're running live-fire exercises with actual tactical scenarios, ma'am. It might get a little intense for an office worker. Feel free to observe from behind the safety barrier." His emphasis on office worker drew knowing smirks from the trainees, who had formed a semicircle around her, subconsciously creating an us versus her dynamic. Harper nodded silently, her face betraying nothing as she took the observer position indicated. Her eyes, however, automatically scanned the range, calculating distances, noting wind indicators, and identifying potential variables. An unconscious professional assessment she couldn't have suppressed if she tried. What followed was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. During the first demonstration, Instructor Jennings pointedly explained basic firearms terminology whenever speaking in Harper's direction, breaking down concepts like trigger discipline and sight alignment as if teaching a child. "This is what we call a firing stance, Ms. Harper," he explained loudly while demonstrating, prompting barely suppressed laughter from the trainees. Notice how different it is from sitting at a desk. More laughter, more blatant now. Harper absorbed each condescension with the same impassivity she had once maintained during 72-hour surveillance operations. Only the slight tightening of her jaw betrayed that the words registered at all. She recognized the dynamic instantly, the same tribal exclusion that special operations communities often directed at outsiders. Except she had once been an insider. Perhaps the most qualified insider in the room, though none of them could know that. As the exercises progressed, the trainees themselves joined the psychological offensive. When Harper was invited to move closer to observe a tactical entry demonstration, lead trainee Ryan Cooper deliberately knocked into her shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. "Sorry, didn't see you there," he said, though his eyes showed he absolutely had. "I guess some people just don't command presence." His teammates nodded in agreement, closing ranks around their unspoken assessment. This woman was beneath their notice. Cooper stood 6'2" of sculpted muscle, with close-cropped blonde hair and the chiseled features of a recruitment poster. His personnel file, which Harper had carefully reviewed before arriving, noted his background as a decorated Army Ranger with multiple combat deployments. What it didn't mention was the obvious chip on his shoulder, the need to dominate that radiated from him like heat. During the lunch break, Harper sat alone at a corner table in the facility cafeteria, methodically consuming the bland institutional food while maintaining awareness of her surroundings, another habit she couldn't break. Conversations around her deliberately included technical jargon and war stories, occasionally punctuated by glances in her direction to ensure she understood her exclusion. "Some people will never understand what it takes," said Cooper loudly enough for her to hear, addressing his eager audience of fellow trainees. "You either have the kill instinct or you don't." Harper continued eating, hiding a bitter smile at the irony. Her killer instinct had resulted in confirmed operations that would make Cooper's combat record look like a schoolyard scuffle. But that woman no longer existed. She had buried Ghost for good reasons. Reasons she reminded herself of whenever the urge to reveal her true nature surfaced. The afternoon session moved to the elite shooting range, where the trainees would demonstrate advanced marksmanship. A female journalist from the Washington Post had arrived to document the FBI's next generation of tactical response. Her presence only amplified the trainees' performative masculinity as they adjusted gear and posture for potential photographs. As she interviewed Cooper about the program's intensity, he glanced toward Harper and added, "It's not for everyone. Some people are made for support roles, pushing papers, making sure the real operators have what they need. It takes a special breed to do what we do." The statement was clearly meant to reach Harper's ears, and she received it with the same blank expression she had maintained throughout the day. Inside, however, memories flickered unbidden. The weight of her custom rifle against her shoulder, the perfect alignment of breath and heartbeat before a crucial shot, the stillness that came over her entire being when she entered what her team had called ghost mode. The journalist, sensing a story angle, approached Harper during a break in the demonstrations. "And you're observing from the administrative side. What's your impression of the program?" Before Harper could respond, Deputy Director Keller intercepted smoothly, placing himself between the women. Miss Harper is getting a simplified overview today. The technical aspects would be beyond her purview. He smiled thinly at Harper, adding, "We value the support staff's perspective, of course, but this is primarily a technical demonstration." The journalist nodded, clearly losing interest in the unremarkable woman, and returned to photographing the impressive male trainees in their tactical gear. As she walked away, Harper caught sight of a single female trainee among the group, a compact, serious-looking woman who stood slightly apart from her male colleagues. Unlike them, she wasn't posturing for the camera or exchanging macho banter. She was checking and rechecking her equipment with focused precision, ignoring the social dynamics around her. Something in her isolation resonated with Harper. As the qualification shoot approached, the atmosphere grew more serious. Each trainee would face a complex course requiring split-second decision-making, tactical reloads, and precision shooting at varying distances. The current record holder was Cooper, whose score from last month's preliminary had set a new benchmark for the program. His confidence bordered on arrogance as he checked his custom-fitted tactical gloves, making sure everyone noticed the deliberate professionalism of his preparations. "Since we have guests," Keller announced, inspecting the shooting line with his hands clasped behind his back, "perhaps we should offer our civilian observer a small demonstration before the official qualification begins." His tone made it clear this was meant as entertainment rather than inclusion. "Miss Harper, would you care to attempt our basic proficiency course? Nothing complicated, just 5 stationary targets. Even our administrative staff should find it manageable." The trainees exchanged amused glances at this unexpected development. Cooper leaned toward his colleagues, stage whispering, "$10 says she holds the rifle like a broom." This drew more than a few chuckles. Another trainee mimicked trembling hands and a frightened expression, drawing more laughter. Harper stood still for a long moment, her face unreadable. The wooden box she had impulsively brought in her purse suddenly felt heavier, as if the Navy Cross inside were pulling her toward a past she had deliberately abandoned. Then, with a subtle nod that few noticed contained military precision, she stepped forward. "I'd be happy to observe more closely," she said, her voice so quiet that Keller had to lean in to hear her. This perceived timidity only fueled the trainee condescension, and several pulled out phones, anticipating entertainment worth recording. Instructor Jennings handed her the standard-issue tactical rifle with exaggerated care. "Careful now, it has some kick. The trigger is a little curved piece under the barrel." He winked at Cooper, who was already recording on his phone, anticipating a viral fail video to share with his military buddies later. "Don't worry if you miss completely. These targets are pretty small for beginners." The rifle felt both foreign and achingly familiar in Harper's hands. Different from her custom weapon, but governed by the same immutable physics she had mastered long ago. Her fingers automatically found the correct positions, muscle memory overriding 10 years of deliberate forgetting. The weight distribution, the sight alignment, the balance point, all of it registered in the part of her brain that had never really forgotten who she was. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Harper," called Keller patronizingly from behind the safety line. "Just try to hit the paper on any of the targets. That would be quite an achievement for a first-timer." The trainees had fallen silent now, phones ready, expressions caught between amusement and second-hand embarrassment for what they were about to witness. The female trainee Harper had noticed earlier stood slightly apart, her face showing neither mockery nor expectation. Just a neutral assessment that reminded Harper of her own professional demeanor in another life. In that brief moment of connection across the room, something shifted in Harper's resolve. She turned to face the targets, raised the rifle to her shoulder, and prepared to fire. But she froze. The familiar posture, the weapon against her shoulder. It all brought back a cascade of memories she had spent a decade suppressing. The targeting system in Kandahar. Colonel Westfield's voice in her earpiece authorizing the shot. The perfect execution followed by the immediate betrayal. the political fallout that had erased 15 years of service. The artificial life she had constructed from the ashes of her career. A decade of self-imposed invisibility had become her armor, her protection against further betrayal. Now, with all eyes on her, that carefully constructed shield was threatening to shatter. Her finger hovered near the trigger guard, trembling slightly, not from inexperience, but from the weight of decision. To demonstrate her true ability would mean stepping back into the light, exposing herself to the world she had deliberately left behind. Cooper's voice cut through her thoughts. Maybe we should set up a smaller target, like a barn. The ripple of laughter that followed seemed to physically push against her. Harper lowered the rifle slightly, nearly surrendering to the path of least resistance. Fulfill their expectations of mediocrity. Maintain her cover. Retreat back to the safety of being overlooked. It had worked for 10 years. She could endure this temporary humiliation and return to her invisible life tomorrow. No one would ever need to know that the administrative assistant processing VA claims had once been the most lethal precision shooter in the Marine Corps. Ghosts could remain buried, along with all the pain and betrayal associated with that identity. In that moment of hesitation, her eyes caught the reflection in the shooting range's safety glass. For a split second, she didn't see the drab administrator with graying hair, but the shadow of the Marine who had once been legendary among those who operated in the world's darkest corners. Her fingers unconsciously traced the outline of the faded crosshairs tattoo beneath her blazer. One shot, one breath, the mantra she had lived by, seemed to whisper from the past. She had never missed when it mattered. She had never failed her team until the system had failed her. The question that suddenly crystallized wasn't whether she should hide her abilities, but why she had allowed people like Westfield and Cooper to define her worth in the first place. Then her gaze shifted slightly, noticing the young female trainee at the back of the group, the only woman besides herself in the room. Unlike the others, she wasn't laughing. Instead, her expression reflected something like resigned acceptance of the humiliation playing out, as if she had experienced similar treatment herself and was simply waiting for it to pass. In the young woman's eyes, Harper recognized the cost of allowing such moments to go unchallenged. For the first time in 10 years, she considered the possibility that her disappearance hadn't just been self-preservation, but a kind of surrender to the narrative others had created about her. From her pocket, Harper felt the hard outline of the wooden box she had impulsively brought with her today. For 10 years, it had remained on her desk as a reminder of betrayal. Now its presence seemed to pose a question. Was she protecting herself by remaining invisible, or simply allowing the Westfields and Coopers of the world to continue unchecked? The answer came with surprising clarity. She might have buried Ghost, but she had buried her dignity along with it. Her trembling stopped, her breathing aligned to the rhythm she had once mastered in another life. 4-count inhale, 4-count hold, 4-count exhale, 4-count pause. The pattern that had steadied her through hundreds of impossible shots. "I'm ready," she said, her voice so quiet that Keller had to signal for silence among the snickering trainees. With mechanical precision, she raised the rifle to her shoulder. Harper settled into a stance that immediately silenced the closest observers, those with enough tactical experience to recognize the transformation occurring before them. Her feet planted with textbook precision, weight distributed perfectly between heel and toe. Her shoulders relaxed rather than tensed, creating a natural pocket for the rifle butt. Her support hand cradled the foregrip with practiced certainty rather than nervous tension. Most tellingly, her breathing pattern shifted into the controlled rhythm that advanced shooters develop over thousands of hours of practice. A pattern visible in the microscopic rise and fall of her shoulders. "Remember, just aim for center mass on any target," Instructor Jennings said, his voice betraying the first note of uncertainty as he registered the sudden shift in Harper's demeanor. Several of the trainees exchanged glances, their mockery giving way to the first hints of puzzlement. Without acknowledging Jennings, Harper sighted the first target, a standard silhouette at 25 yards. Her eyes, once ordinary, now reflected the cold calculation of a predator. Her first shot cracked through the range with surgical precision, striking dead center the target's head zone rather than the larger chest area. Before anyone could react, she transitioned seamlessly to the second target, again placing a perfect headshot. Her movements had the fluid economy of a concert pianist. Nothing wasted, nothing theatrical. The third, fourth, and fifth targets fell to the same precision. 5 consecutive headshots, each within a half-inch grouping, despite the targets being at different distances. The entire sequence took less than 7 seconds, a speed that even the top trainees required careful concentration to execute. She immediately transitioned the rifle to safe position and stood at rest, eyes forward, expression unchanged. The room fell completely silent as the echo of the final shot dissipated. No whispers, no shuffling feet. Instructor Jennings stood frozen, his clipboard forgotten in his suddenly slack grip. Cooper's phone had lowered, the recording forgotten as he processed what he had just witnessed. The female trainee had pushed forward slightly, her eyes wide with something between shock and revelation. After a stunned pause, Deputy Director Keller cleared his throat. "Well, that's unexpected proficiency. Perhaps you've had some recreational shooting experience." His tone suggested he was offering her a charitable explanation, an avenue to dismiss what they had just seen as something less impressive than it appeared. Cooper, unwilling to surrender his position in the hierarchy, laughed forcedly. Beginner's luck. 5 stationary targets at standard distance isn't exactly challenging. He stepped forward, clearly eager to reclaim attention. Our qualification course involves moving targets at variable distances, with tactical position changes and decision-making elements. It's an entirely different level of difficulty. His colleagues nodded, rallying behind him as he attempted to re-establish the pecking order. The unspoken message was clear. A lucky sequence didn't erase the fundamental reality of who belonged and who didn't. Harper turned toward Keller, her voice steady for the first time that day. "May I attempt the full qualification course?" The question hung in the air, simple but laden with implication. The officials exchanged uncertain glances. The journalist from the Washington Post had stopped packing her equipment, sensing something newsworthy developing. Finally, Instructor Jennings nodded. "I don't see why not, if the deputy director approves. It might provide valuable contrast to the professional standards our trainees represent." The statement was an attempt to maintain the established narrative. Whatever Harper might accomplish would serve as a foil to highlight the trainees' superior abilities. Keller hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Set up the qualification course. Full protocol." His eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Harper more carefully than before, the first hints of recognition flickering across his features. The advanced course was unveiled, a complex sequence requiring shooters to move through 3 positions, engage 15 targets of varying sizes at distances from 10 to 100 yards, perform 2 tactical reloads, and make split-second shoot/don't shoot decisions on civilian/threat targets that appeared randomly. The course was timed, with penalties for missed targets, improper identification, and slow transitions. Cooper's record score of 91 out of 100 possible points had been considered nearly untouchable by program standards. As Harper received the safety briefing, Cooper approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry about embarrassing yourself. Nobody expects an administrator to handle this level of complexity." He paused, adding with deliberate condescension, "Just do your best, ma'am." When the buzzer sounded, Harper moved. The transformation was complete and undeniable. Gone was the administrative assistant with that hesitant posture and downcast eyes. In her place stood a predator, economical, lethal, and absolutely certain. She moved with the predatory grace that had once earned her the call sign Ghost. Her first 5 shots formed a tight group in the smallest target's center ring at 75 yards. A display of accuracy that would have been impressive from a stationary position, let alone during the opening movement phase. She transitioned positions with combat efficiency, dropping to optimal cover before engaging the next sequence. Her tactical reloads were performed without looking at the weapon, her eyes never leaving the target field, fingers finding magazines through muscle memory alone. As the course progressed, the atmosphere in the observation area transformed. The smirks had disappeared, replaced by expressions of disbelief and reluctant admiration. The female trainee had pushed her way to the front, watching with undisguised awe. Even the journalist had stopped pretending professional detachment. Her camera now focused exclusively on Harper's performance. "Who is she?" someone whispered, the question rippling through the previously dismissive group. When Harper reached the shoot/don't shoot segment, generally considered the most challenging part, she distinguished herself further. While most trainees slowed considerably to make correct identifications, Harper's target acquisition and decision-making happened at a speed that bordered on preternatural. Threat targets were neutralized with precise double taps, while civilian targets remained untouched. Cooper's expression had transformed from condescension to stone-faced disbelief, then to thinly veiled anger as his record visibly slipped away. The female trainee watched with something like vindication as Harper completed the final sequence with textbook precision. As the final buzzer sounded, the electronic scoring system calculated her performance. The display flashed 98 points, 7 points above Cooper's record. Harper saved her weapon and placed it carefully on the designated table before turning to face the stunned audience. The silence that followed was absolute. No whispers, no shuffling feet, not even breathing seemed audible. Cooper's face had drained of color. Keller stared at Harper with dawning recognition, the pieces finally coming together. The female trainee's expression transformed into something between shock and vindication. For several seconds, nobody moved, as if the reality of what they had witnessed required collective processing. Finally, Instructor Jennings stepped forward, his military background evident in his posture. "Ma'am," he said quietly, with the respect one veteran offers another, "who are you really?" The question cut through the pretense of the day, acknowledging that they had just witnessed something that couldn't be explained by luck or recreational shooting experience. Several of the trainees had gathered behind him, their earlier mockery replaced by grudging professional respect. Even Cooper stood silently, his arrogance momentarily shattered by the undeniable evidence of superior skill. The moment stretched as everyone waited for Harper's response, for the explanation that would make sense of what they had just seen. Harper didn't answer immediately. She removed her administrative ID badge and placed it on the table beside the rifle, the symbolic gesture speaking volumes. With measured movements, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the small wooden box, opening it to reveal the Navy cross inside. She didn't display it prominently or explain its significance. She simply allowed it to exist in the space between her past and present. Those close enough to recognize the decoration inhaled sharply. The Navy Cross was not awarded for administrative excellence. It was a testament to valor in combat, second only to the Medal of Honor. Its presence answered questions while creating new ones. Keller stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the decoration. "Staff Sergeant Diane Harper," he said softly, the use of her former rank confirming he had made the connection. "Ghost." The nickname emerged as barely more than a whisper, but it carried through the silent range. "Thank you for the demonstration," Harper said finally, addressing no one in particular. Her voice remained soft, but it now carried an unmistakable authority that filled the room. She closed the wooden box and returned it to her pocket, the brief revelation complete. She had nothing to prove to these people, had nothing to prove to anyone anymore. The administrative assistant and the legendary Marine sniper had briefly occupied the same space, and now they would separate again. She had made her point without a single word of explanation or justification. The silence that followed was no longer confused but respectful. The acknowledgement that they had misjudged not just her abilities but her entire existence. She turned to leave, pausing only briefly beside the female trainee, whose eyes had followed her throughout the performance. The young woman stood straighter now, as if Harper's demonstration had physically altered her posture. "Remember," Harper said, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "technique can be taught. But judgment, knowing when to pull the trigger and when to walk away, that's what separates operators from weapons." She placed a light hand on the young woman's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that transcended the day's events. "They'll underestimate you. Use that." The trainee nodded, understanding the multi-layered advice being offered. It wasn't just about shooting, but about navigating a world designed to underestimate certain people until proven otherwise. Sometimes that underestimation was a tactical advantage. As Harper walked toward the exit, Keller stepped into her path. "Staff Sergeant Harper," he said, his use of her former rank confirming he had made the connection. "The Bureau could use someone with your perspective. There would be a place for you here if you wanted it." The offer was sincere, delivered with the respect her performance had commanded. Behind him, Cooper and the other trainees waited for her response, their earlier arrogance replaced by uncomfortable self-awareness. Harper studied Keller for a moment, then glanced back at the range, where the evidence of her skills still displayed on the electronic scoreboard. She had spent 10 years hiding from her abilities, constructing an identity based on invisibility rather than excellence. The system had betrayed her once, but perhaps this was an opportunity to reclaim some part of herself without surrendering to bitterness. "Some battles aren't won by fighting," she replied with the quiet certainty that had once made her an exceptional operator. "Sometimes victory is simply refusing to disappear." The statement wasn't a direct answer to his offer, but it carried her decision nonetheless. She had spent 10 years making herself small, and while she wasn't ready to fully reclaim her former identity, she would no longer deny her own capability. Without waiting for a response, she continued through the door into the sunlight. Behind her, she left a room full of elite operators who would never again make the mistake of judging capability by appearance or position. The female trainee watched her go, then turned back to the course with renewed determination, picking up the rifle Harper had used with a different kind of confidence than she had shown earlier. Later that evening, Harper sat in her modest apartment, the wooden box open on her coffee table. For the first time in a decade, she didn't feel the familiar ache of betrayal when looking at the Navy Cross. Instead, she felt something like reconciliation, not with the institutions that had failed her, but with the parts of herself she had buried alongside Ghost. Her phone displayed an email from Deputy Director Keller, the subject line reading simply, "Consultant Position." She didn't open it immediately. Whatever decision she made would be on her terms, not driven by the expectations of others or the need to prove herself. She closed the wooden box, but for the first time in 10 years, didn't immediately hide it away in her desk drawer. Instead, she placed it on her bookshelf, visible, acknowledged, a part of her history rather than a secret shame. The ghost wasn't fully resurrected, but neither was it buried anymore. It existed somewhere in between, just as Harper herself now did. In today's world filled with snap judgments and superficial assessments, how many ghosts walk among us, their true power hidden behind masks of ordinary existence? How many exceptional individuals have been dismissed because they didn't match someone's expectation of what excellence looks like? If you were in Harper's position, would you have revealed your true abilities, or would you have maintained the comfort of invisibility? Some battles are won not by fighting, but by simply refusing to be erased, by standing in your truth even when the world has decided you don't belong. And sometimes the most powerful statement isn't what you say, but what you silently prove through action when everyone expects you to fail. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community, where we celebrate quiet strength, real struggles, and unexpected victories. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.